Hi everyone, it's James here. How you all doing? Welcome to another video. So today I thought I would do a quick Velvet Underground discussion and rank the albums and nominate 10 favourite songs. I'm going to show CDs only because I don't own any Velvet's material on record. Not through want of trying. I have looked for their records over the years. I'm aware that there are vinyl reissues out there, but I've always fancied owning some original copies, but they are quite hard to come by. So I first became aware of the Velvet Underground round about the time that I became aware of people like Bob Dylan and Neil Young. So we're talking probably kind of early 90s when I was a student. And I honestly can't remember now how I first decided to get a record or a CD. I know the first one I ever got was this one. This is their third album. Which is just called The Velvet Underground. I had this round about the same time that I got Highway 61, and unlike Bob Dylan, it took me a fair few years to get into Bob Dylan, and that album in particular I found quite hard work. But this album, I found it really accessible right from the start. There's a great run of songs on here. Candy Says, What Goes On, Some Kind of Love, Pale Blue Eyes, Jesus. The first 5 songs on this record are all absolutely brilliant, just perfect pop perfection. And it was slightly surprising to me because I think I did know something of the Velvet Underground's reputation as being this very kind of sleazy underground lo-fi kind of band. And one thing I did know about them was that they were a really crucial influence on Chris Difford from Squeeze, who were my favourite band when I was growing up. And the story of how Chris Difford met Glenn Tilbrook in Squeeze is that Chris put a notice up in a sweet shop window in Blackheath in London saying guitarist wanted for band with upcoming tour, which is a complete lie. Chris didn't have a tour or a band or anything, and he said he had a major record deal as well, and that was a lie too. But he put as his influences the Beatles, the Kinks, Glenn Miller and the Velvet Underground, because he'd been a big fan of them. And when he and Chris Difford got together, Glenn Tilbrook heard the Velvets for the first time, and apparently he had a very similar epiphany, in the sense that I think he'd heard that the Velvets were this very scuzzy, lo-fi, subversive kind of group, but Chris turned him on to their more pop side. And so I heard that one first, and then at some point after that, I suspect I got this one next. This is the Velvet Underground and Nico, and this record is more what you consider to be the kind of archetypal Velvet sound. I mean, I think of all their albums, this one is the most influential. I think it was Brian Eno who came up with that quote. I think he said something like, only 30,000 copies of it were ever sold, but every single person who bought a copy formed a band, and I think that's certainly true. I mean, they were an absolutely huge influence on so many people. I mean, you're talking, David Bowie is the most obvious example. Bowie absolutely loved the Velvets, and he loved Lou Reed, and got to know him and produced him, of course. But so many more people beyond that. If you look into the 80s and the kind of underground and indie music that came up, particularly in the UK. If you tuned into the John Peel show during the 80s, you would hear so much music that sounded like the Velvets, and it all kind of went through into the kind of, that era of great independent British music, bands like Primal Scream and My Bloody Valentine and the Jesus and Mary Chain. They all had a Velvet Underground kind of scuzzy lo-fi approach, and what I've always thought about the Velvet Underground is that they're a little bit like the Beatles in the sense that you can not like them, that's fine, but you can't deny them in a sense, because their sound and their aesthetic is so deeply woven into pop music and rock music from the late 60s onwards. And what I've always admired about them is their subversive spirit. When they first burst onto the scene in the 60s, it was almost like anti-music. They were the original punk rockers. They didn't give a shit, I mean, I don't think they fall into that lineage of bands that are rooted in great musicianship or in great production. They really didn't care about that. I mean, that was fairly obvious, and on the first album, it's not very well produced at all. It's very raw. It's very scary sounding. It's very lo-fi. It's it's bedroom indie music years before that was ever invented, and pretty much every bedroom pop band that ever existed owes a huge amount of debt to the Velvets pioneering that aesthetic. And I love that mixture of Lou Reed's effortless street cool kind of punk attitude mixed with his own background in writing bubblegum pop music. You know, he was a songwriter for hire in the pre-Velvets days, but the mixture of that with John Cale, who was this South Walian avant-garde viola player who'd studied with Aaron Copland and was really into kind of atonal screeching and all kinds of mad sonics, really did produce something very, very unusual on this record. It's an extremely original album. The songwriting generally is brilliant. I mean, Lou Reed is one of the greatest songwriters of all time, and there are some absolutely stunning songs on this record. Of course, you've got Nico on here as well. I think it was Andy Warhol's idea to pair her up with the Velvets. So you've got this very sort of icy sounding Germanic female singer doing these Lou Reed songs. It's a really strange combination. And like I said, the Velvets really didn't care. They were from a totally different world somehow. It was a world of drugs and sadomasochism and a very kind of street level approach, I suppose. And they really, they were not part of the kind of musicianly lineage that came from the Beatles and the Stones, and that was going to go on to inform bands like Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd. It was something completely different. But then of course John Cale left the band, or was forced out of the band because he fell out with Lou Reed so badly, and then they went off into this more pop direction. Apart from the second album, which is their most kind of screechy and atonal work, and in fact John Cale is on this one still, of course. Sister Ray on this record, I would say, is hard work. I used to listen to that driving up and down the motorway, on full blast. It's one of those things, one of the kind of rites of passage when you're a young music lover and you want to kind of prove you've got these kind of cool credentials. Oh yeah, I can listen to Sister Ray at top volume over and over again. That kind of screeching, fairly horrible sound, I must admit. The main track I really love on this record is The Gift, which is a Lou Reed short story, which is read over a kind of instrumental backing. Really great. But apart from that, this record is probably my least favourite Velvets record. So we can slip into the Velvets albums rankings now if you like. So incidentally, I'm not gonna include the album Squeeze, which was the album that was released after all the original members had left the band. It was the record that the band Squeeze named themselves after, but there were no original members in the group by then, so I'm not going to include that one. So we'll have that at number 4. The second album, White Light, White Heat, after which Cale left the group, and then they moved on and went, like I said, they went into a more kind of pop direction really on the third album, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So after the fourth album, let's just move up one step. I would probably put as my next favourite, I would go for the debut album. Not because I don't rate it. I actually rate all the Velvets albums, to one extent or another. But there's just one I like more. So many original songs on it. So we'll get into that in a minute when I do my top 10 favourite songs. My second favourite would definitely be Loaded, which was the fourth album. And this has got some great tracks on it, including my favourite Velvet song of all time. So by this point, like I said, Cale had left the group and Doug Yule had joined, but there's still some great songs on that one. But my favourite Velvet's Underground album would be this one, the third album, which is the first one I ever got. It's just got so many great tracks on it. If we're going to try and do this top 10 Velvet songs of all time, I think we'd start just from 1 to 5 on this record, straight away. Candy Says, just a fantastic, wonderful, tuneful pop song. What Goes On, which is this very stripped back, trancey kind of song. It was covered by Brian Ferry. He did a really good version of it. But the Velvets version is very stripped back, it's very to the bone, and it's got this really great kind of trancey guitar riff in it, which just goes on and on. It just rolls on and on forever, I couldn't believe it when I first heard it. I thought, God, is this going to go on for much longer? Because it's just the same thing, just that repetition, the drone thing going on, which goes back to avant-garde music. Even though Cale had left the group at this point, that kind of influence was still coming through. Then you got Some Kind of Love, which that song blew my mind when I first heard it, simply because it was this really strange quality that Lou Reed or this talent that he had of being able to sing a song and make it sound like he was making up the words as he went along. Which is, I think that song is the most perfect example of that. You listen to it and you find it hard to believe that he's written the words, because it sounds like he's just making them up on the spot, just verse after verse. There's something about, it's actually quite hard to describe why that impression comes across. It's something to do with just the stream of consciousness, and it's almost like a kind of calculated random effect that he has in the lyrics. And I did used to listen to it and think, is he making these words up as he goes along? Because if he is, then he's a complete genius. You know, I don't think he was. I could be mistaken. Some Kind of Love, just a great track. Now, then you've got these two songs which I've always loved. Pale Blue Eyes, which is this beautiful, stripped back, slow, sweet love song, I guess. Absolutely hypnotic. Just a great, great song. Great, great performance by Lou Reed. And then the fifth song, Jesus, as well, in a very similar vein. A kind of very ethereal religious song, or a song of spirituality, very soft, very lulling, and I just like the sentiment of the lyric. So yeah, I mean, those 5 songs on this record, all absolutely top notch, and the other songs are not too shabby either. And the 10th song on the record, I would have that as my 6th favourite as well, the song After Hours, which is just a lovely little, almost like a childhood nursery rhyme sung by Mo Tucker, the drummer. And it's got a lovely childlike quality to it. That's the interesting thing about the Velvets, because they had this kind of very sleazy, streetwise, punkish kind of side, but then they could do these very childlike songs as well, kind of a sense of childlike wonder and innocence. And After Hours is a great example of that. So that's 6 songs from this record. I won't pick any from this. There's no absolute favourites on the second album, so we need to pick some from the first record. So I'm going to go for I'm Waiting for the Man, which is just one of the great, you know, don't give a flying F-U-C-K rock songs in history. You know, there's no concessions there to any kind of commercialism. It's raw, it's transgressive, it's almost like a kind of, well, it is a kind of stream of consciousness thing. It's almost like a diary entry, just a diary entry in the day of the life of this drug addict who's waiting for his fix on the street corner. You know, Lou Reed was incredibly influenced by literary influences, you know, writers. You've got people like Raymond Chandler, William Burroughs, and Lou Reed was consciously trying to turn rock lyric writing into something which was very literary, and I think he was probably the first person to do that, really. And I mean, he certainly did it fantastically well. So I'm Waiting for the Man. We'll have that as my number 7. We'll have Venus and Furs, number 8, which is a really atmospheric, strange, beautiful song, really otherworldly. It's got the viola in it, it's got this very slow, brooding kind of sound, and it really doesn't sound like anything else. That was just the thing about the Velvets, they were so original. I mean, so many bands have imitated them over the years that it can be difficult to discern how original they were, I guess. But that song is certainly very original. And then we'll have All Tomorrow's Parties, which is one of the Nico tracks. Always loved it. There's a great version of that on one of the Japan albums. I can't remember which one it is now. One of the early Japan albums has a really great cover version of that song. It's beautiful. Apparently it predated the Velvets. Lou Reed wrote it in his pre-Velvets days, but it's just got this very enigmatic lyric. It's got a wonderful tune, a very enigmatic kind of arrangement as well. It's very ethereal, it's very mysterious, and Nico sings it so well. It's not exactly seductive, but it is very enigmatic. That's the best word I can think of. So there we go. So I think we're on 8 now, aren't we? So I guess we're going to have to go with Heroin, which again is just one of those songs. It's so to the bone and so kind of searingly honest. I mean, there was no posing at all with Lou and John Cale. They were already addicted to heroin when they were doing the Velvets, and I'm not saying that that's a particularly admirable thing in itself, but they were definitely not pretending. They were not, this wasn't a pose. It wasn't anything kind of, they were not trying to be anything that they weren't. And that song really lays it on thick. That screeching violin which comes in, which or viola, which I think it's meant to evoke cold turkey, really, heroin withdrawal. And so that actually only leaves me with one one song to choose from this album, and it is my favourite Velvet song of all time, and it's the track Rock and Roll, which is the third song on this record, which is just a very upbeat, poppy, rocky, kind of feel-good, transistor radio type rock and roll song. It's just a simple little narrative about a girl who's really in love with rock and roll music, and you know, it's her lifeblood. She just loves tuning into the radio. Well, she keeps tuning into the radio, but she can't hear any sounds that she likes, and then she finds this rock and roll station, and it completely just turns her life around. It's such a great song. It sums up that 1960s thing of just this emerging youth movement, and just this emerging music, this exciting rock and roll music, and all these teenagers tuning in. And it's got a great guitar riff in it as well. It's just, I've always loved it. It's got a real kind of you know, radio commercial pumping kind of feel to it, quite different to a lot of the Velvet stuff. But I had that on a tape in my car back in the 90s, interspersed with all this dance music, because I was into a lot of dance music in the 90s. But that song, I would always stir that into the mix, because it just seemed to hit the same kind of hedonistic vibe as the dance music I was listening to. So there we go, that's 10 of my favourite Velvet tracks. I've ranked the albums. Let's just try and remind you. I had the second album in 4th place, then I had the first album in 3rd place, then I had the 4th album in 2nd place, and then I had the 3rd album in 1st place, and my head hurts now. So hope you enjoyed the video, and yeah, that's it. Take care, see you all soon, bye bye.